Okay, hello and welcome to today's webcast. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and I am joined today by Lauren Phillips and Brandon Holtzclaw of Bottomline Technologies. They're here to talk today about AP automation that leverages Dynamics ERP and SharePoint. We invite you to add your feedback and ask our speakers questions today. They will save time at the end of the presentation. You can use the Q&A block that you'll see to the right of the slides in the webcast session. And also please be aware that if you want to adjust the size of the display to improve clarity, you can use the little magnifying glass icon that you should see just in the upper right corner of the main panel. So without further delay, I am happy to welcome Lauren Phillips to take the stage. Lauren.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to join us at Bottomline for, as Jason pointed out, a quick review of AP automation while leveraging your Dynamics and SharePoint investments. We're happy to have you, and again, thank you for taking the time. Just to put a quick face to the name, again, I'm Lauren Phillips, Area Manager here with Bottomline Technologies, and I'm joined by our Solutions Engineer, Brandon Holtzclaw. And Brandon's going to actually delve into some of the technology and give us a little bit of a day in the life of an invoice as we show you AP automation. Quickly, from an agenda perspective, and I'm going to be mercifully short here on the front end with some PowerPoint slides and kind of positioning things and setting some stuff up for Brandon's demo. But running down the agenda, we've kind of worked through the introductions there. We're going to speak to a little bit about why automate accounts payable, what drives folks looking into accounts payable automation, and we're going to speak to the importance of leveraging SharePoint. Typically, that's an existing technology, an existing platform that's in-house. And we're going to touch on business case and best practices. I'm then going to turn it over to Brandon, who, as I said, is going to bring us a real-life scenario, or a day in the life, if you will, and work through and show you folks some of the technology that Bottomline offers, and we'll close with some Q&A. So pretty straight ahead, and we should get out of here in under an hour. So with that said, just a quick overview of Bottomline Technologies. In addition to our invoice and accounts payable automation solutions, we're also a global leader in comprehensive payment and banking solutions. And we've been doing this for many, many years. So any of you folks who are joining today who also have payment needs, document output needs, we'd like to speak to you about that as well. From a high-level viewpoint of our offerings, that includes document output, document capture, and that clearly incorporates OCR technologies, imaging capabilities, and workflow, which is AP automation, that's coding, routing, approval processes, leveraging SharePoint, and we're going to speak to some of the specifics in that area, and of course residing on and living in Dynamics ERP. You're going to see that in Brandon's demo coming up here shortly. Some of the Dynamics community recognitions in areas that we participate in, Business Critical SharePoint program. It's a terrific partnership with Microsoft. We're obviously a gold certified ISV partner. We're also involved in something that's very important to all parties concerned, and that's the TAP program, our Technology Adoption Program. And last but not least, I'd like to announce to everybody here on the call and the webinar, we have been awarded the 2014 President's Club for Microsoft Dynamics. That was received here just recently this year. We're very proud of that and happy to talk about it. Very quickly, let's talk a little bit about what drives people to conversations, seeking solutions for accounts payable automation. In a paper-based world, when you're working with hard copy paper and what is sometimes referred to as sneakernet, or getting things around the office manually. All of those manual processes there, and we've just thrown a few up on the screen here with a rather convoluted process flow to this. This is not atypical in the paper world. Paper, by its inherent nature, is labor intensive. It's costly. It's quite slow. It lacks the ability to report and audit in a process to understand where some of the bottlenecks really might be. And that's just the nature of paper. Manual data entry into financial systems, while we've been doing it for decades, it's fraught with problems and challenges, namely manual data entry error rates. They're consistently in the 10 to 12% range. That's been proven by Forrester and Gartner and anybody else that's looked at it, again, over the decades. It's these manual processes that lack accountability. They lack the ability to focus on areas that are, like I said, bottlenecks. And this is what typically drives people to start looking at what might be available from an automation standpoint. When we look at SharePoint, we ask ourselves, why leverage it? What does it bring to this equation? SharePoint is many things to many people, but it's got some inherent capabilities as a platform that lend itself to accounts payable automation, right? One of those is a simple access to data, to information, to content. And this can be leveraged across the enterprise. Folks who are typically going to accounts payable staff to get accounts payable answers could potentially, given the security rights, have direct access to that information, to that AP content within SharePoint. Again, all governed by security paradigms. SharePoint versus proprietary databases. Proprietary databases are yesterday's news, all right? SharePoint is an open SQL-backed application that we can all work with internally. Leverage technical talent that's in-house, and that can be internal versus external resources. But you can leverage that group of people that already have capabilities to enhance your invoice processing and accounts payable environment. And lastly, ERP purity. While Dynamics does have inherently the ability to store documents, it's clearly not a best practice. Once you get into any kind of volume, any kind of real document storage within an ERP system, the ERP system suffers. Its core capabilities are going to be greatly diminished because it's trying to do two things: SharePoint to the rescue, right? And avoid adding another disparate system to your solution. Are there disparate standalone accounts payable automation solutions out there? There are. We think we've found a better way to incorporate your existing technologies to get you on the road to automation faster. So when we leverage these existing components and we inject Transform AP from Bottomline into an organization, you can see how we can take that cluttered, convoluted, and very challenging paper-based environment, bring a digital element, particularly from the invoice itself perspective, and introduce workflow and reporting and status visibility, along with remittance delivery, right? All leveraging and staying within the Dynamics world that you know and love today, right? And this is really what we're trying to achieve, just from a graphic perspective, trying to clean up that convoluted, difficult process that, again, paper brings to the equation. Real quick, a quick break. I'm going to ask Jason if he could to introduce a SharePoint poll. We'd like you all to just take a look at your panel screens, if you would. Jason has put up a poll for a quick poll question. Do you currently leverage SharePoint is the question. And the answers available to you are: we do not currently leverage it. We have it. We don't use it. We have it and use it as a file share or a shared folder structure. And lastly, we have it and really leverage metadata functionality, so you're completely leveraging the SharePoint capabilities. So I'll give you just a minute to answer those while I move on in the interest of time.
And we'll close that in about another 10 seconds here.
Great. So real quick, a business case for SharePoint. One of the things you need to understand, and it's a very large one, believe it or not, is the ability to leverage SharePoint that you already own. And the fact that you don't need to look at new infrastructure, new hardware, additional database resources, a completely different software program, training, the list goes on what disparate, standalone, or siloed applications bring to the table. You're able to leverage the existing security. Active Directory specifically, it's already in place in your organization. Easily find the documents within SharePoint. SharePoint comes with its own search engine. It's a terrific content management solution. We focus it and leverage, for our purposes, invoices, accounts payable content. And believe it or not, Dynamics, you may not know this, Dynamics utilizes SharePoint as its foundation. It's an interesting point of fact. And AP automation, when leveraging SharePoint, drives more SharePoint adoption. And this is when you start looking at exponential benefits around the organization where SharePoint, where it may have once been something as simple as a file share, glorified file share, if you will, is now becoming a very important and useful tool within the organization.
I'm going to bring those results up here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jason.
Are you seeing that now?
Very good. So the vast majority, about 52%, we have it and use it as a file share. Not in the least bit surprised to see that result from the poll. That is extremely typical because SharePoint often, again, it's often discussed, if not debated, where SharePoint is all things to all people. The question then becomes, well, what is it to us? What is SharePoint going to be for us? Here today, we're trying to illustrate a very focused, very specific use for the SharePoint platform. And in that file share setup of SharePoint, it's a genuine injustice for that platform to be used that way, because and I'm going to show and talk about metadata here and its importance. When you're not leveraging metadata in SharePoint, you're really not getting the full benefit from it, and I'm going to talk to that here in a second. Metadata. You hear the term all the time on just around various technology discussions, metadata this, metadata that, etc. Metadata can be used in the capturing process. It's also used in the search process. It allows us to scale SharePoint to be even more of an ECM or an enterprise content management system. They are tools. This metadata I'm speaking of is a tool that really opens up the world. It's the keys that open up a whole host of things that we're able to accomplish within SharePoint. And security structure, roles-based accessibility, something as simple as I, as a user, cannot see invoices over $5,000. I can't work with them, see them, know about them because of an internal requirement. With that piece of metadata, if I know the invoice amount, I'm able to then restrict access to it. It's something as simple as that, but it really, as I said, opens up the world. So SharePoint, again, can be much more than a glorified file share. And again, with that poll results, again, very typical. We see this all the time. It gets set up, but it doesn't get a specific focused use case to leverage SharePoint. So let's talk about metadata real quick. When we look at folder structures, and we all do this, we all stored content within a folder structure, and this folder structure could be in SharePoint for that matter, but it really doesn't let us do much except sort of sit there in a very static and non-dynamic way. We're able to create folders, we can name them, we can organize it in such a way that looks very elegant, as this little example does, but when we get down to it, it really doesn't lend itself to bring automation, search capabilities, reporting capabilities. The list goes on and on what metadata really brings. Here's the irony of this. When I create this folder structure, believe it or not, I'm actually entering metadata on a particular document, content type, whatever it might be. And I'm going to illustrate that now. So if I take a document and I run this document over to my scanner, right? And it could be, that scanner could be a multifunction device or a dedicated Kodak or Fujitsu scanner, who knows. And I scan this document in. That application, that capture technology that's over there in that MFP typically gives the document a name for me. But I, in my infinite wisdom, understand that this document really should be named something appropriate, something that describes it to someone else as very specific. By doing something as simple as this, And unfortunately, this sits here in a very static form now. But doing something as simple like this is really, as we look back on it, I've got a PO. And you can see on the right hand of the screen, this is starting to build out. I've got an invoice number. I've also got an invoice amount. Now, if we look back at the folder structure, I've got a vendor name. I've got an account type. I've got the state for this particular vendor. And I've even got the region for it. In the SharePoint world, the purchase order is referred to as the content type. It can be invoices, purchase orders, local menus of various eateries, etc., right? That's the content type. Within that content type, we have the aforementioned metadata. And this is the information, now that it's in a database form, we can leverage it a whole entire host of ways, from searching, kicking off workflows, reporting capabilities, and the list goes on. That's the importance of metadata. Again, the irony is, in a folder structure, particularly when we build it out in SharePoint, we're coming up short because it is the metadata that's required. It's just not in a form that can be used. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about what metadata is, and I apologize for folks who know all about that, and it's a little bit redundant, but it's a good point to make, and it's something that we focus on. Okay, I think I've just about made my time, maybe a minute after. Apologize for that. I got one last slide before I turn it over to Brandon. From a very high level, we're going to take a look today at accounts payable overview within Dynamics, leveraging SharePoint. We're going to look at capture and verification. We're going to look at the workflow process, and this is a whole host of capabilities from 2- and 3-way matching, coding, searching on documents, an approval process, and we're going to do it with a Microsoft Dynamics background. So, without further ado, let me bring up my last slide. I'm going to introduce Brandon Holtzclaw, and Brandon is going to take us into the world of accounts payable automation, leveraging Bottomline technologies. Brandon, if you would, sir.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Just one second here while I share my desktop. All right, so that should be transitioning for everyone. You should see now sort of a blue and gray application. And as Lauren mentioned there, today we're going to kind of walk through the day in the life of an accounts payable invoice. We're going to start off at the beginning of the process. We're going to capture the invoice up front. So in Lauren's, one of his last few slides there, we were scanning and capturing the document at the end of the process and storing in the file share. So here with Transform AP, we're going to do that document and data capture up front. So once again, that just gives us more visibility into the invoice process. Once we've captured our documents, we're then going to send those over with the associated metadata to SharePoint. So not only are they stored and easily retrievable within SharePoint, but we'll also start off some workflows, some accounts payable workflows that come along with our solution. And then we'll walk through the workflow process all the way to our ERP. So in our demo example today, we're going to use Dynamics AX. So with that said, we'll get started here. So what you should be seeing on the screen right now is our capture solution. We call this Transform Active Capture. Transform Active Capture allows us to drive physical scanners. So if I had a scanner attached to my PC, I could put some paper in it and scan those documents in. I also have the ability to do what I call a virtual scan. So maybe for those invoices that you're receiving electronic, maybe receiving those as email attachments today from your vendors, I can simply just browse out, choose those invoice images to bring those into the solution. As I scan in my invoices, you'll notice the thumbnails at the bottom. This allows me now the ability to do some document controls. I can split these invoices out into individual invoices. I can flip them, change the orientation if needed. A lot of our customers, what they'll do at this step is before they actually scan, they'll make 2 stacks of invoices. They'll make a stack of single-page invoices, and they'll make a stack of multi-page invoices. For that stack of multi-page invoices, they'll actually put a document separator page in between each invoice. That way, when they scan the invoices, Transform Active Capture will recognize that separator page and automatically separate them out. Then when they scan in their single-page batch of invoices, they can simply come up to the top left-hand corner, designate that the pages per document are 1, click Update. Now you notice that my thumbnails split out there. So now I've gone through, I've scanned in my documents, I've separated them. We now have 4 one-page invoices. I'm going to click Done. Now Transform Active Capture is going to go through an OCR step, optical character recognition. So it can capture that key metadata that we want to capture for these invoices. So invoice number, invoice date, vendor information. It's going to automatically capture that information for us and present to us any information that it may have had trouble locating. Transform Active Capture is a self-learning and a learn-on-the-fly tool, and you'll see that as I walk through these examples that I can actually build what we call fingerprints behind the scenes. I don't have to go through any separate steps of creating vendor OCR templates. I can work with the document and it learns on the fly. So the first thing you'll notice if you look at the thumbnails at the bottom is we skipped over the first invoice in the batch. That's because Transform Active Capture was able to capture all the metadata, and the metadata that we captured exceeded the confidence threshold. So with that said, we can set up a confidence threshold at the field level as to how confident we want the solution to be that it's captured the information correctly. So we can say we want you to be 80 or 90% confident that you have captured that data correctly. If it falls below that threshold, it will highlight the field in either a yellow or pinkish color, as you can see here reflected on this AT&T invoice. So we can just kind of start working with these invoices here. So the vendor address, I'm just looking, and everything looks fine to me. I can look on the invoice here. Everything was captured. It just fell below that confidence threshold. And then for the invoice number, we were not able to capture an invoice number on this invoice because our AT&T invoices don't have an invoice. It's more of a statement. There's just an account number on this document. So in my demo system, I typically will use a combination of some fields here to enter an invoice number, so maybe AT&T, and then maybe today's date. So today's the 23rd, and we'll just type that in there, and we now have our invoice number. Moving on to my next document in the batch. This is an example of maybe a new vendor, Fourth Packaging. We've never worked with them before. So you can see it was not able to capture that information for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work with the invoice here. I'm going to tell Transform Active Capture this was an invoice because I could scan other document types here. Now, instead of typing into these fields, I'm going to work with the image. I'm going to rubber band or lasso around the data to capture the information. You can see it populates on the left-hand side there. So reducing keystrokes. And also what this is doing is building that fingerprint that I mentioned. So the next time I might scan in a Fourth Packaging invoice, I don't have to go through this step. It'll capture all this information for me like I did for the previous two. PO number there and the invoice amount. Type in my change there. Okay, and now we'll move on to our last invoice in the batch. Another example here, was able to capture everything, just did have some low confidence on our invoice amount. You'll notice it does highlight on the document where it captured this information from, just to bring my attention to the field that requires some verification. So now I've worked through my batch of invoices, I've scanned them in, I've captured all the metadata. Now I'm going to click Done, go through the export process, send these documents that I scanned in along with the metadata over to Transform AP inside of SharePoint. So once the invoices are over inside of SharePoint, they will be filed in our invoices document library. So let me pull open my SharePoint environment here, refresh here. We should have some new invoices. We do. So when we install Transform AP, we create what's called a SharePoint site. We create an invoices document library, and we create a workflow task list. What you're looking at right now is the invoices document library, and that's where we export those new documents to along with the metadata. So you can see, once again, we have our new PDFs when I clicked refresh there, and you can see the metadata that we captured. So now these are fully indexed documents, very easily to be searched and retrieved inside of SharePoint. I don't have to know a folder taxonomy to navigate through. I can very easily find these documents here in SharePoint. We'll take a look at some searching and retrieval at a later time. So not only do we have these documents and the metadata stored inside of SharePoint, as I mentioned before, Transform AP comes with an accounts payable invoice workflow for your PO match and your exception handling, for your non-PO invoices, for your GL coding and approval processes. And so now, once the documents land in our document library here, that's when those workflows start executing. So with that said, let's go ahead and start working some of these invoices here inside of our task list. So I'm going to jump over to my accounts payable process or task list here. Since we live inside of SharePoint, we get to leverage SharePoint features and functions, and one of those is list views. So any metadata that I've captured, I can use that data to filter or sort not only my documents, but also my workflow tasks. So you can see here I have all of my processor tasks together, and that's a non-PO invoice that requires some coding and approval processes. And down at the bottom here, I have my PO match tasks that are available here as well. So anything like your vendor name or locations, maybe a priority in a due date, we can sort and filter those so we can very easily work our task list here. So to start working one of these invoices, I simply click my workflow task title, and this will now open up my my non-PO task form. So we'll focus on non-PO today because that's the invoice type that we see that requires the most touch points, because there is the coding process, there is the approval process as well. So now that I've opened up my task form, you can see I do have my invoice image available here. So if you think back to that messy slide that Lauren showed at the beginning, we've taken the paper out of the process at the beginning of the process. We're no longer shuffling paper around the organization. We now have a digital image that we can work with. So I have my AT&T image here that I can work with. I have a supporting documents tab here. So if I have some supporting documents, maybe it's something as simple as an email correspondence or terms or a contract that I would like to associate with this invoice, I can very easily browse and upload and associate to this invoice here while it's in process. On the left-hand side here, we have our data entry form. A lot of this information has been pre-populated from the OCR process, but I do have the ability to make any changes if I needed. I also have the ability to do things like your vendor search, and this is a live lookup, in this case to AX, pulling back my vendor details. So if I need to make any changes, I can choose that here. I also have the same option at the bottom here with my GL coding grid if I need to change my codes. So in this case here, you'll notice that I already have a distribution line for my invoice. That's because Transform AP has the concept of default vendor codes. So for a particular vendor, things like your reoccurring bills, your utility bills, your rent, your magazine subscriptions, things that you receive on a reoccurring basis that you code the same way every time, we can set up a default expense account, or obviously multiple distribution lines if needed. And once our workflow finds the vendor ID, so in this case here, when it found the vendor ID 8003, it knew to default to the specific account here. So it allows just a reduction of a step there, no need to apply any GL codes. But if I needed to make any changes, I do have the ability. I can click my Edit Row button here. This will now make this line editable, or once again, I can choose my expense account, I can choose my dimensions in this case here, and change the GL coding if needed. I also have the ability to add new rows. So in this case here, we're just coding to one line, but I can code to as many distribution lines as needed. Once I have my invoice coded, I'm now ready to send it out for the approval process. And to do so, I have my approval path drop down here on the left-hand side. So in our demo environment, we have our approval paths set up by department. So based on the type of invoice it is, I'm going to choose the appropriate approval path. This could be department as you see here, it could be location, plant, whatever makes sense for your organization. And what this approval path relates to is a list view inside of SharePoint. So you'll notice that this list reflects what you saw back in that drop-down. So I'll send this invoice down the marketing path. And when I submit this invoice, the Transform AP workflow is going to look at the approval path that I selected and the total amount for that invoice. And the workflow will cross-reference the list here to determine who the appropriate approvers are. So if the invoice is $500 or less, it's only going to require an approval by username approver 1. If it's over that threshold, it's going to require a second approval by username approver 2. So it will work up the approval hierarchy based on the dollar amount of the invoice. So in this case here, this is a small invoice. It's only $35. It's only going to require that first level approval. And type in some comments here. I'm going to submit this invoice for approval. So now, as I mentioned, the Transform AP workflow is going to take a look at the amount, the approval path, to determine who the appropriate approver is. Transform AP does support email notifications, letting users know that they have invoices that require approval. So you can see here I just received my email for AT&T. The body of the email can include as much or as little information as you like. So you can see in this scenario here, we're actually passing all the way down to the coding details. We're also including a PDF attachment of the invoice image itself. So if I'm a mobile user, I'm out in the field and I'm looking at this on my tablet or my smartphone, and this is enough information for me to approve this invoice, I can simply reply back to this email, type in an appropriate keyword, approve, reject, any comments that I'd like to send, and send this back to Transform AP, and that will execute the workflow approval. So now Transform AP will take that, read the response, and move the invoice to the next step in the approval process. So in this case here, that was the only step in the approval process for our AT&T invoice. The Transform AP non-PO workflow is a 3-step process. The first step is the processor step. So in this case here, that was my AP user coding the invoice, applying the GL codes. That AP user could have simply just been looking at the invoice and determining who they needed to send it off to for the appropriate coding. If it's someone out, if it's a business user out in the field that does the coding, I could send it off to them and have that step done there. Once the processor step is complete, we move to our approval step, and that's what we just worked through here. We can approve via email. We can approve via a specific iPad app if your users are iPad users, or we can approve directly in SharePoint using the task form like you saw earlier. Once the approval process is complete, our third and final step is what we call quality control. And quality control allows a user to put one final set of eyes on the invoice before it's uploaded to the ERP system. So this could be someone or this could be an AP user. Maybe it's the first time AP sees the invoice if we pushed it out to the business users for coding originally. Or it could be an AP supervisor, once again, that just wants to put their eyes on the invoice before it's uploaded. We have some of our customers that will put a business rule around the quality control step. So if the invoice is over a certain threshold, we want it to stop at the quality control step. But if it's under that threshold, go ahead, once the approvals are complete, and upload that invoice directly to the ERP system. Okay, so just refreshed here, and we now have our quality control task from where we just approved that invoice, our AT&T invoice. So we'll go ahead and open it up, and we'll complete this invoice and upload it to, in this scenario here, to Dynamics AX. So a couple things I'll touch on before I submit this invoice. At this step, you'll notice that all of my fields are read-only. I can't make any changes. In this case, if I saw that something was incorrect, I can reject it, send it back to the processor and ask them to change it. So maybe if the GL coding was incorrect, I can make that change or ask them to make that change. This is a configurable step at every workflow step. We can allow users to make changes to certain fields or GL coding based on your requirements. Some of our customers do want, say, approvers to be able to change GL coding. Others do not. So that's a very simple configuration inside of Transform AP. And you can also see here our comment history. I only added comments at the coder step, but you can see that there in our comment history. So that's another advantage of using a workflow system is that we're keeping track of the invoice every step of the way. We know who's touched it, any comments they've had, so it has that workflow history and it's auditable. So everything looks fine to me as the quality control person, so I'm going to submit this invoice, and we're going to upload it into, in this case, AX. So I'm going to jump over to Dynamics AX. For our non-PO invoice, we'll go into our invoice journal, and then that will open up our journal here. So I'm going to jump to my latest here and my newest journal, and I can tell that because when Transform AP uploads into AX, we create unique journal descriptions. You can see here the AP user's name, who uploaded the invoice or the transaction, a date stamp, and then a journal description. So I can have rush invoices, prepaid invoices, so I can handle them at a different pace. So if I have rush invoices and I want to post and pay those at a faster time, so I can take advantage of some early pay discounts. So I'll open up my lines here, and I've submitted a few invoices today, so I'll have a few invoices in my batch, but this is the one we just submitted here, our AT&T. So you can see our vendor line and then our coding line. As you remember, we just had the one distribution line, so we can see that ledger line there. Not only does Transform AP create the transaction here inside the ERP system, we also provide users, ERP users, the ability to access that image that's still stored inside of SharePoint. So as Lauren mentioned earlier, instead of storing the document in the ERP system, the goal is to store it in SharePoint, a true enterprise content management system, but we still want to give our ERP users access to that document right here from transaction screens. So in the case of AX here, we've added a button to the form. So I can simply click to see the tap invoice, and that will pull back our AT&T invoice. Once again, that's still stored in SharePoint, but to a user, that seems like it's available right here from AX. So for our users that may not be ERP users but still need access to that document, since we have captured that metadata up front, we can very easily track and search for documents inside of SharePoint. So far, you've just seen me working workflow tasks. Well, let's take a look and search for a document. So I'm going to go here. I've got a view here for track invoices. As part of our solution, we include a search toolbar here. It just makes it very easily to put in search parameters, date ranges, or specific transaction information. So I have a specific invoice in mind that I want to search for. That invoice number is 89472. And once I hit tab there, you'll see it executes the search. So very easily, typing in my metadata, I'm no longer navigating file structures. I just put in that metadata I'm looking for, and it brings back my invoice. Okay. Well, I know that was a high-level overview of Transform AP, but hopefully that gives you a good feel for how you can utilize your investment in SharePoint for an accounts payable automation solution such as Transform AP. So I'm going to pass it back to Lauren to wrap up and also go through some Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that. So, folks, just a quick high-level recap on some of the things that we talked about and what some of the things that Brandon showed today, and we do understand that's a cursory look at the technology. Again, it's just to give you a little flavor, a little understanding of where this integration, what these connectors do, as we refer to them as, how we like to keep you within your ERP at all times or as much as humanly possible. So some of the things that we're looking at and some of the subjects we're talking about here are boost your cash yield, improve accountability, and visibility. And I'll emphasize visibility. One of the things these systems are capable of doing is getting you some up-to-the-minute, almost real-time, if you will, understanding of where your money is on any given day. And from a reporting or a response perspective regarding management, financial folks within an organization who would like to know what's going on and not have to wait for a monthly or quarterly report for that information. A system like this is going to get you that information at your fingertips, and that's going to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. Real-time integration with your ERP. I think one of the things that probably caught your eye during Brandon's presentation was our ability to stay inside that look and feel and and ERP environment. And what does that do? It means, as an example, that you're not off to a 2-week off-site training class to learn a disparate, siloed, separate system that doesn't integrate tightly with what you're currently working with. And that's something that simply shouldn't be done anymore. And we want to get you up and running, something as simple as a lunch and learn to get started with the solution. But you're going to be looking at screens and having an experience that you're very used to because it looks and feels like your existing ERP. And we talked about leveraging the existing SharePoint platform. With 52% of you folks responding that SharePoint is out there as a file share, as a huge opportunity for you to leverage SharePoint. And go back to your SharePoint folks today and let them know what you heard today. They'll more than likely be ecstatic to hear that there potentially is a specific focused use for their SharePoint platform. And engage in conversations with them and bring us in if you'd like. We're happy to discuss it with them as well. And a package solution, right, with standard out-of-the-box functionality, things that you know and love and expect where things could be. And Brandon just touched on a few of those. So, at this point, and we are going to be clearly getting out before the top of the hour, which is great, and get you folks on time to your next meeting at the top of the hour. Jason, have you been receiving any questions from the crowd? We'd like to go ahead and ask the folks if you've got any questions out there. We can open it up via the chat window. There's a Q&A window there. If you click on that and ask a question, if you've been doing that throughout the presentation, we may have some of those. Jason may have his finger on some of those as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. So please do use the Q&A block you'll see on the right side of the panel. And a few people have been asking questions already, so we can start right in. One question that came in, does this program work in Dynamics GP?
In GP, yes, it does. Absolutely. Again, leveraging Microsoft Dynamics World. If you're a GP customer out there and have liked what you see now, granted, Brandon was showing our demonstration here was in AX as our vehicle for demonstration, but absolutely love to talk to you about that if you're a GP customer.
All right, and while we're on the topic of versions, there was also a question, can it work with AX 2009?
Yeah, I'll take that. It sure can. So we have a connector specific for AX 2009 and 2012.
All right. We had an audience member who wanted to ask, it was kind of a general question, but the comparing SharePoint against Alfresco. Can you give any insight into that?
SharePoint versus Alfresco. Alfresco, in my understanding, is an open source content management solution, not an accounts payable specifically, but in what's called an ECM or enterprise content management solution that is open source. An ongoing debate is open source versus out-of-the-box solutions, and you'll get people who fall on both sides of those. But SharePoint, because of its, I guess, ubiquitous nature, kind of being everywhere, I'd have to give it the advantage. In bringing in an open source product like Alfresco, if you don't have the resources in-house to deal with that, it's not going to be a viable solution for you. So I'd have to give the edge to SharePoint.
All right, we have a couple more version-related questions here.
Sure.
Is Transform AP AX 2012 R3 compliant?
Yes, it is.
All right, and would there be, and going back to the 2009 question, would there be an easy transition from AX 2009 to AX 2012? And this attendee says our company is planning to change versions in about 2 years.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a great thing about a solution such as Transform AP that's inside of SharePoint, because really going to 2012, you would just upgrade to our latest connector that supports 2012, and you would probably go to R3, so you would use that connector, and then everything else inside of SharePoint would stay as is. We would just update our workflow to point to that new environment, so it would be a very straightforward upgrade.
All right, can SharePoint Foundation be used, or does your solution require SharePoint Server?
We support both, Foundation and Server.
Is it possible for multiple invoice approvals to be sent in a single email rather than individual emails?
It sure can, and we've got customers that have decided to go that route instead of inundating their users with an invoice for every, email for every invoice. They'll send maybe a daily or a weekly, just depending on some preferences there. Maybe a sort of a notification, then they can go into SharePoint and manage their workflow tasks. But definitely.
All right. Matt asks, can we create forms that end users can fill out for new vendor requests or check requests when there isn't an invoice yet? We'd like to leverage the approval workflows that you talked about.
Yep. So Transform AP is an AP invoice specific workflow. We do have some processes around new vendor. So you can receive an invoice maybe from a new vendor that hasn't been set up for the in the address book yet. We can route that workflow task to a new vendor setup group, for instance. So we do have the ability to do that. And then for check requests, we've got some processes around that we've worked with customers before. So there's several different ways to handle that, and we'd love to talk with you about what would make sense for your organization.
All right. Richard asks, once an invoice is uploaded and posted and paid in Dynamics, can the check number be added to the metadata for the invoice in the SharePoint library?
Yeah, that's another great question. We actually have, as part of our integration with AX, or Dynamics, we have a payment status service. So that service will actually pull Dynamics on a scheduled basis and pull back payment information. So when those invoices are marked paid, we'll pull back, payment journal number, check date, things like that, just as you mentioned, to update that SharePoint library with the additional, payment metadata. So you're rounding out the circle of the life of the invoice. It's not just the invoice information, you also have that payment information as well.
Does Transform AP support invoice matching?
It does. As we mentioned earlier that we have our PO matching process where we support both two- and three-way matching.
All right, and a follow-up question on multiple approvals in a single email. Can approvals be done in this? Let me see if I can. Can approvals be done in a single email, or would the approvals have to be done within SharePoint in that case?
I believe that was okay. So that's for if you're receiving an email for multiple invoices. In that case, you would do the approvals inside of SharePoint or through our iPad app. The email would is only for transactional approvals.
All right. Shelley asks, can you search by GL account code? Can you search on what was purchased? In other words, what did I buy?
So once the invoice has been coded, that is part of the metadata that is captured at that time. So you would be able to search on that.
All right. Carol asks, what do you do with EDI vendor invoices?
So I guess there's a couple different ways we handle that. We have some customers that they already have an EDI invoice process in place, and they just keep that process as they do today because it's an automated process. We have other customers that are receiving an EDI file. They really don't have a process in place. They would like to have a sort of a workflow or approval process before that EDI is processed. And in that case, we have other tools available where we can take that EDI that file in and create sort of what I call an artist rendering of the document. So we can take the data, create a human-readable invoice for that, and submit it to Transform AP, and then work that through the invoice approval process.
All right, we have one more question in the queue at this point, so I'll make a last call for any other questions. And as I get to this last one, I just want to note that we are recording today's session. We'll make it available on demand and send everyone an update when that is available. Our last question here in the queue, what is the payment status service that you offer? I think it you showed the logo for it on one of the slides.
I believe that we're referring to Pay Mode X, and if that's a product or a requirement you have, please contact us directly. We'll put you in contact with the right people. But Pay Mode X is the name of that solution.
All right. Well, that is the end of our question queue, so we'll start wrapping up here. Lauren, Brandon, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending. Appreciate you taking the time. Look forward to hearing from you.
All right, that concludes today's session. Have a great day.